child support. His new office is conveniently located in Carrollton, Texas. You can call Mr. Malik at 214-881-2100 or visit him at malik.law. With us right now is Mr. Joe Powell from the Malik Law Firm. He's here to answer all your family law related questions. We're not taking any immigration law related questions. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Good evening. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I am doing good too. So Joe, while I wait for the calls to come in, do you have any updates for our listeners?
Well, I have some things I'm prepared to talk about today. I thought I'd start out talking to people today about the emotion that tends to follow family law.
Okay.
I've been practicing family law for over 30 years, and a lot of attorneys can't do family law that long. I've seen a lot of attorneys come out of law school and they'll do some family law for maybe 5 years, and they experience a tremendous amount of burnout because in family law, emotion is a part of the practice. Now, I was fortunate in that before I went to law school, I had some experiences teaching in public schools and being a counselor, and those experiences kind of helped me be ready for the emotional overlay that I have dealt with as a family law attorney. And there's a kind of a semi-joke, but there's some truth to it, that in family law, for every motion, there's an equal but opposite emotion. And I think there's some truth to that. I will talk in a given week with 4 or 5 potential new clients that'll come in and talk to me and try to decide what to do about their situation. And often, I'm dealing with people that are emotionally drained. I've had people cry throughout the entire interview. And, dealing with that takes some special qualities. And, I think that the fact that I had prior experiences in counseling and such really prepared me to kind of deal with that. I find that with many people, divorce is the worst experience they're ever going to have. It may be worse than the death of a spouse or a serious illness, especially if one survives the illness, because not only are they dealing with the pain and anguish of having to go through that process, but there's a sense of rejection. So if you lose a spouse through illness or death, you don't have that rejection that you can have in family law. And I've seen a lot of people that are affected by that for the rest of their lives. Now, most people, when the divorce is final, they get over a great deal of the emotional overlay. I tell people that in family law, about half the people I deal with are crazy, but most of them will get over being crazy when the divorce is finished, because that experience, the experience with divorce, can be that devastating. Now, as a result of that, you want to, if you're out looking for an attorney because you need to deal with a family law situation, you want to find somebody that you're not only comfortable with, but you want them to be able to go past just the legal experience and be able to help you with some of the things that you have to do and decide as you're going through the divorce process. Experience with children. I've had a lot of that. I have a lot of it now. I experience issues with children every week. And that the experience that I've had helps me give people advice that really may not be legal advice. I can tell somebody how to act when they go into court, and I can get somebody prepared in most cases to deal with that. And I've had enough experience. I know what questions to ask and things like that. And I can help people through that process because of the number of these cases that I've handled. I know what questions to ask. And I've had a lot of training even before I became a lawyer, because my original training was in science. And in science, you learn how to solve problems. And in family law, you have to learn how to solve problems and help people deal with various aspects of life. I think that the life experiences I'm able to bring to bear are probably just as helpful to people as the legal experience that I've had. The legal experience is what I sell, but the life experiences are a very important part of what I do. Anyway, that's not really an advertisement. That's just me saying, kind of how I care about this stuff. I've even seen that people who kind of know a divorce is likely, they see that a split is coming. Maybe they've seen problems within the family for a while, and they're not totally shocked by getting served with papers, but they still, I guess what I would say is seeing it coming isn't quite the same thing as getting served with the papers. Once you get served with the papers, the reality of it really can hit you. So if you're having trouble dealing with the emotion of a divorce, I strongly urge people to get counseling if they need it. A lot of people have never really done counseling. They kind of see it, maybe that there's a stigma to going to a counselor. But in a case like going through a divorce, it may be something that would be very, very helpful, and it's worth a try. I said earlier that I was a counselor myself in schools for a long time, and I dealt with kids that were having problems, of course. And so talking to a person that's had some training in how to get people through difficult processes over and above the legal aspects can be very helpful. So look for somebody you're comfortable with. Look for somebody that brings some things to bear that go beyond just the briefcase. Now, I want to talk about some specific kinds of cases just to kind of break away from the emotion and get into some of the procedures and situations that people are going through. One very difficult type of case that walks in the door fairly frequently is that the opponent has control of a lot of resources. Maybe they own a business and they've been running it. They generate a lot of income in some cases. And so that individual has a lot of resources they can put into a legal situation. And if the other person has not had the benefit of those resources and can't readily tap into a large sum of money, let's say, they may have difficulty getting in and hiring an attorney. We have to protect our firm as well as represent the clients, so we do charge for what we do. And legal work is expensive. We've had a lot of training and experience, and so we charge people, in our case, a moderate amount of money, but we do charge people for what we do. And if you're at a disadvantage in the money situation, there are some things we can do about that. We can try to get into court quickly and get a temporary orders hearing. And in some cases, the court will order attorney's fees to be paid, spousal support to be paid, child support to be paid, and that can help with the financial situation. But I have seen wealthy individuals pour a lot of money into the attorney's preparation for a temporary orders hearing, and the other side has to respond accordingly. I had a case recently where the person hired me in the middle of last month, in the middle of November, and we've already generated probably $5,000 to $6,000 in attorney's fees, which is very unusual, but it can happen, and we've had to do that because the other side was putting a lot of time and effort into the case. We had to respond accordingly. So there's things that can be done if there's a disparity in available resources. We can get into court, but we can't do anything until we can get into court in some of those cases. Like if the controlling spouse, the person that has control of the funds, kind of shuts the other person off. Now that, while I'm on that subject, let me mention that a person's salary is not generally separate property. The person may control their income, but they don't necessarily own it outright. Anything you earn by your time, talent, and labor in a family situation where you're married, your spouse, theoretically at least, owns about half of that wealth, about half of that salary, and that goes for retirement funds, money in bank accounts, and your salary. And if there's a huge difference between the salary between one spouse and another, the court is probably going to give that spouse some help by issuing orders that equalize the money resources that are available to each of the spouses. Again, with child support, temporary spousal support, and sometimes just making some monies available and sometimes ordering attorney's fees to be paid. Now, let's talk a little bit about the power of judges. I see some people that are maybe strong individuals, and all of their lives they've been in control of the things that are happening to them, and they believe that they have control of their lives in a general sense. But when a family files for divorce, when either party files for a divorce, excuse me, the judge is the person that really has the power in that situation. Now, that power is not unlimited, and I have some comments I'll make in a minute about that. But oftentimes, a very strong individual, especially a strong, wealthy individual, will feel almost immune to being controlled by an outside source. But the judge has a great deal of power, including in radical cases, in extreme cases, the power of contempt, where they can put someone in jail who is refusing to follow their orders and instructions. So judges have a great deal of power. But while I'm on the subject of power, every person should realize that the power of a court and the power of a judge is not unlimited. And the best example I can give a person is if the other person would commit a criminal act, an order of the court is probably not going to stop them. Potentially dangerous problems that occur sometimes in family law disputes. One person or another may have an anger problem that rises to the level of actual danger. And I tell people sometimes you have to deal with the physical security of your residence, maybe improve the lock situations, install cameras that are monitoring things all the time. There are things that people can do. I have even once or twice advised a person to consider possibly getting a handgun and learning to use it. I know that's a drastic suggestion to make, but an attorney can't go over to someone's house and protect them late at night. We're not bodyguards or policemen, and so that's not our profession, and we're somewhat limited on our power, especially if somebody calls us and they're in a very dangerous situation. I have talked to policemen on the phone while trying to help a client deal with a situation, but that sometimes is not very helpful either. But I just want people to realize that they need to be prepared, and sometimes they have to take some actions beyond what their attorney can do. I only have the power of a court order signed by a judge, and until I have that, I don't really have any way to necessarily directly influence a case. Now, I'd like to talk to people a little bit about the fact that you want to make a good impression on the judge by actions that you take. And one of the things I like to caution people about is try not to put children in the middle of a family law dispute. It's very rare that a parent should ever ask children to decide to choose between their two parents. That's really hard for children, and judges hate that. Just be aware that if you want a judge to take the other person's side, get your kids in the middle of the litigation. You should do everything you possibly can to keep your kids out of it. I suggest that people say things like, both of us love you. I want you to continue to love your father or mother the same as you always have. These are adult decisions. A judge may make some decisions. You don't have to worry about it. This is not your problem. This isn't a child's problem. This is an adult's problem. So things like that can go a long way to protect children from the impact of a divorce situation, especially if custody is a dispute. Now, while I'm talking about disputes, there are two types of cases that tend to be unusually expensive, and that's a big property case, especially if there's the necessity of evaluating the value of a business. That can be complicated, time-consuming, and rather expensive. So big property cases can be expensive, and custody disputes are often very, very expensive. Here are some ways that a person can cut down a little bit on the expense of a case. Now, one of the best ways that two people going through a divorce can cut down on the cost of their litigation is to really bend over backwards to try to see the other person's position and reach some agreements. A good example of that is when people start fighting over furniture and private possessions and stuff. If people can't make decisions regarding that stuff and divide things fairly, they're going to increase the cost of their case. And other things that increase the cost of a case, besides the type of case like big property or children's custody, if a person has to do a lot of formal discovery, that can dramatically increase the cost of a case. And another thing that people don't often realize can drive up the cost of a case is having to do service by publication. You don't even know where the other spouse is. It seems like that would be really easy. All you do is serve them by publication, and you don't really have an opponent. But the process of service by publication involves hiring another attorney to try to find and represent the absent spouse, and that's required by the courts. And a lot of courts are making it more and more complicated to do service by publication. So it can add $1,000 or even $1,500 to the cost of a case if you have to do service by publication. And I've begun warning people about those increased costs when that's necessary. But sometimes it is. You still have to do it. I talked a little bit about people reaching agreements in regard to divvying up property. But if people can put away a lot of their issues and try to see both sides of a case, a lot of times agreements can be reached, and things like mediation can actually save people money, because although a mediator doesn't have power over a case, they're not a judge. They don't get to make the final decision, but they can exert influence, and about 80% of the time, mediation resolves most of the disputes in a case. And mediation can also reduce the cost of a case because the mediation settles some things that don't have to be brought up to the court. I mentioned discovery a couple of times. I want to tell people the types of discovery so people have an idea of what those items are. One type of discovery is interrogatories. Interrogatories are just questions, and you can, if necessary, you can ask questions of the other side that have to be answered. If necessary, a judge will force people to answer those questions, and some of those questions can be pretty pointed. Another type of discovery is called a request for production, and that's where people have to produce documents, photographs, and other things, maybe tape recordings, things like that. And that's done by what's called a request for production. And again, a court can order people to have to respond to those requests for production. Another discovery vehicle is called requests for admissions. And these aren't used real often, but they can be pretty effective. Example, admit or deny that you physically abused your child in about 6 months ago and the police had to be called. Well, the person has to respond and admit or deny that statement. So those are called requests for admissions. Another type of discovery, a rather expensive type of discovery, is a deposition. That's where a person has to come into the office and sit down and answer questions as if they were in court. The same rules apply in court. So avoiding discovery can decrease the cost of a case, and you can avoid discovery by both sides agreeing, if you ask for information, we'll give you the information. You don't have to do formal discovery, which complicates matters and takes longer to handle. Anyway, that's some remarks. I wanted to talk a little bit, time permitting, and we've got a little time, about some misconceptions that people have of family law and court. And one is, my opponent is lying. Well, sometimes that's true, but I have found in family law, sometimes the other person is not lying. They are stating the truth from their perspective. Being wrong is not the same thing as lying. A person can be in error, or a person can have a difference of opinion where it's not really a lie. Now, I've dealt with liars in court, and it's uncomfortable. It's a skill that we have trying to get past that. And there are ways to kind of handle somebody who doesn't tell the truth. Another thing that I hear that's kind of a misconception is that a man can't win custody. That's not true. In my case, over history, I've probably won 60% of the cases where I represented a father seeking custody. Now, normally, dads don't seek custody unless the situation is unusual. And if the dad has actually been the primary caretaker and things like that, they may very well be able to win a custody dispute. In some counties, you can get a child custody evaluation to help with a custody dispute. Dallas and Tarrant County have family court services that can provide those child custody evaluations fairly inexpensively. Other counties like Collin and Denton County, where I also practice, the child custody evaluations are a lot more expensive in those counties. Here's another one that I run into. If I pay for the house, it's my house. Well, I talked a little bit about community property earlier. chances are if you buy a house during the marriage, it's community property. Unless you can prove that you bought it with gifts, inheritance, or something like that, it's probably going to be community property. So is your retirement account and other things like that. Certainly the bank accounts are probably community property. The process of divorce I'll mention briefly. All legal matters in Texas start with what's called a petition. And in a petition, the person filing the lawsuit, who is the petitioner, the other party is the respondent,